Hey everybody, Brian, hold on, what was my name again? Oh yeah, Brian Von VA here, back at it again. Today we're going to be talking about what's a common rule or mechanic that people forget. What am I doing here again? Components without a cost or aren't consumed can be replaced by a focus or a pouch. The number of posts that I see about DMs waiving components because they're too fiddly, despite there being a raw way, rules is written, that most spellcasters get them in their starting gear is too damn high. Perception checks that are made in dim light are at a disadvantage. This includes dark vision if it's dark, since those characters will see in the dark as if it were dim light. Chapter 8. The Environment, Vision and Light. The most fundamental tasks of adventuring, noticing danger, finding hidden objects, hitting an enemy in combat, and targeting a spell, just to name a few of course, rely heavily on a character's ability to see. Darkness and other effects that obscure vision can prove a significant hindrance. A given area might be lightly or heavily obscured. In a lightly obscured area such as dim light, patchy fog, or moderate foliage, creatures have disadvantage on wisdom, perception, checks that rely on sight. Concentration checks to maintain concentration on spells after being hit. You can cast spells that do not require material components if you don't have your spellcasting focus on you. The focus only replaces material components, not the verbal or somatic ones. So long as the spell only requires verbal and or somatic components, you can cast it without using a focus. Wish I would have known that when my DM all those years back stole all of our spellcasting foci when we got kidnapped and told us we couldn't cast any of our spells until we got them back. Also, unrelated, but you can cast a reaction spell on your turn, so long as whatever is triggering the reaction happens on your turn. It generally applies to counterspell, but there are other strange scenarios where this might take place, such as casting Fireball on your own space and using Absorb Elements to have the damage. Tools are a thing. You can be proficient with them. They do cool stuff. Use them. Picking a lock? No, that's not a sleight of hand check, despite how Baldur's Gate 3 handles it. That is a thieves' tool check. You don't need to roll athletics or acrobatics checks for standard athletic actions, such as running, swimming, jumping, or climbing. This is especially egregious as it's one of the places where martials get a chance to shine over casters. Basic climbing and swimming are difficult terrain. On a long jump, you cover a number of feet up to your strength score if you move at least 10 feet on foot immediately before the jump. When you make a standing long jump, you can leap only half that distance. When you make a high jump, you leap in the air a number of feet equal to 3 plus your strength modifier if you move at least 10 feet on foot immediately before the jump. When you make a standing high jump, you can only jump half that distance. It's not can't do 2 spells a turn, it's can't do an action spell and a bonus action spell together unless that action is a cantrip. Cover and partial cover, especially when people are in a scrum. Firing into melee, the target behind your buddy has partial cover. I forget about this too often myself. I feel like people tend to forget about insight and passive insight in social interactions. It's more than just picking up on if someone's lying, by the way. It can be sensing that a person is about to attack and making sure that you get the first strike, or maybe noticing that someone is stalling or trying to distract you from something else going on around you. The DM suggests using the longer of the two distances, vertical and horizontal, when measuring diagonally from height. In practice, it really does work out. Using this method, 15 feet away and 30 feet up is 30 feet. The hypotenuse is 33 and a half feet, or 34 feet. Because D&D likes to round down and every space on a board is 5 feet, this would still be 30 feet away for ease of use, unless your DM is really being anal about it. 50 feet away and 10 feet down is 50 feet. Hypotenuse is 50.99 feet, or 51 feet. It's just easier, and it ends up being close enough to the hypotenuse anyway that you can hand wave it. Moving through creatures. You may move through non-hostile creatures' space. In contrast, you can move through a hostile creature's space only if the creature is at least 2 sizes larger or smaller than you. Regardless, moving through another creature's space is considered difficult terrain, and you cannot end your move in a creature's space. Now, I've noticed that in groups I've played with, there seems to be a lot of confusion about how attacks of opportunity interact with other rules and conditions. For example, I've had to explain the difference between forced movement and unwilling movement many times. Forced movement are things that directly force you to move without making you use your own actions or movement speed. Things like shoving and repelling blast would be considered forced movement, which don't trigger attacks of opportunity. Something like dissonant whispers isn't forced movement. It actually forces you to use your own actions to move, which does in fact trigger attacks of opportunity. Another minor thing is that attacks of opportunity require you to see the target you want to make an opportunity attack against. If you can't see them, then you can't make the attack. Duh. People really undervalue breaking line of sight in 5th edition, even though there are some big benefits for doing so. Initiative is an ability check, and thus subject to things that affect ability checks, guidance, exhaustion, etc. Spells with verbal components make noise. Spells with somatic components, on the other hand, require gesticulating with one's hands. Both of these things are easily observable by someone else nearby. You have disadvantage on all ranged attacks if an enemy is within 5 feet of you, not just if your target is within 5 feet. In my experience, components and spellcasting folky. It wasn't until I actually read the focus description that I found it can substitute components, not that it mattered, because my DMs would either forget or not care about needing them. You could be a dual-wielding warlock and not need Warcaster to shoot Eldritch Blasts. I don't know if that would have changed if we tried to use consumption spells like Revivify, though. Once I started DMing, I would explain the casting rules when helping someone make a character, but would either forget or ignore them thereafter. Another is carrying capacity. Unless it was something egregious like an entire door or an armory's worth of weapons, neither of my DMs nor myself would ever enforce it. One that I've always seen forgotten and forgotten is partial cover. I'll give it to them when they happen to accidentally proc it, but no one has actively tried to use it. Hey, cover is cover, you gotta use that stuff, man. No one in our party, including our DM, remembers to spend and reward inspiration. It always comes to mind when we're not playing, but we always forget it in the session. The fact that a scroll can only be cast by a character who has said spell as part of their class's spell list. At the end of the day, it's just not a very good rule. Yeah, make it so they can only be cast by spellcaster classes, but that's it. That'd be a better ruling, I think. Here's a simple one, the help action. Fall damage, and that it has a max cap. Xanathar's Guide to Everything, page 77, somewhere in the player's handbook. The rule given in the player's handbook is simple. At the end of a fall, you take 1d6 bludgeoning damage for every 10 feet you fell, to a maximum of 20d6. You also land prone, unless you somehow avoid taking damage from the fall. 20d6 has an average damage of 69, go ahead, get it out in the comments, and a max damage of 120. Anyone over 120 HP can fall a ridiculous distance with Raw, rules as written, and live. Level 12 fighter, con bonus of +3 with a tough feat. Average HP is something like 138, so they can jump off the floating citadel onto the planet and be fine. How your strength score affects things. Lifting a heavy door, jumping a gap, scaling a cliff, or in my character's case, throwing a table at a tavern door and killing 3 patrons. Do an athletics check. No, Stephen, I can lift 600 pounds with my strength score of 20. That gate weighs less than that. Fuck off with your roll, page 176. No, Stephen, I can jump over that 15-foot gap if I have a running start. I can jump 20 even, page 182. No, Stephen, it just costs 1 extra foot of movement per foot. It's half speed, Stephen, for fuck's sake. Read the player's handbook, Stephen! Page 182. And screw you, Stephen. 50 gold pieces weighs 1 pound. So if one of your characters is carrying 3,000 gold pieces, they are likely encumbered and making a lot of checks at disadvantage, and jingling like crazy. If the DM is controlling a wizard enemy and the players counterspell your spell, you can counterspell the counterspell on your own turn if you have your reaction available. If two characters have counterspell, they can counterspell the counterspell, counterspelling the original counterspell of the original spell. But if you have two wizard enemies, nat 1s and nat 20s don't mean anything outside of attack rolls and death saves. How dare you? I want to feel cool, man. There's no surprise round, you six-fingered man. You don't constantly have your entire inventory ready to use in separate hands, using the dodge or ready action when they have nothing else to do on their turn besides waiting for something. Apparently, people have a hard time understanding, grappling? People seem to attribute a lot of extra things to grappling, some coming from the restrained condition like all attacks being at disadvantage. It's really just athletics versus athletics or acrobatics. If the target fails the contest, their movement is set to 0. Nat 20 doesn't automatically mean success. Like if you roll to convince a king to give you his kingdom, a nat 20 doesn't mean he does. At least in my reading, if a character just wants to know if the thing the NPC told them is believable, they don't simply roll for insight. This is the case passive insight is appropriate for. If they actually want to spend some time chatting up the NPC to attempt to learn their true motivations, that's when an active insight roll is used. Alternate combination of ability, proficiency are awesome. Does your PC ask if it looks like he could be able to jump the chasm before just trying? The character sheet defines jump distance, so we're really estimating gap distance here. Wisdom or intelligence plus athletics, depending on if he knows how to judge the distance intuitively from experience, or maybe if he's learned a technique. The ability to walk out if a DM is being a dick! You feel unsafe, you feel like he's having it out for you, or she, walk. No D&D is better than bad D&D. This is coming from a DM of 23 years. Hey everybody, Brian Von Vier, back at it again at the end of the video. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe, ring that bell, and of course leave a comment down below letting us know what a common rule or mechanic is that people tend to forget. We love you all, be safe, be happy, and see you next time.